we go. I'm back, everyone. Okay, to show you what I have done. And there we go. That's where I started off with, and there's the and now I did all that as well. Okay. Mm, 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 mm.
Kitty cat. Ready for some treats? Yes? Yes. What have we got for you? What's these ones? Ooh. What's this? Is it yours? Is it yours? Yes, it's yours. Is it? Yeah, now. Have you had a good sleep? Good girl. Ready? Here's a turkey and lamb. Is that nice? Yum yum. Mmm. Good girl. Mmm. Not run anymore. Smudge? Come on. Come on. You want it? Oh, right here. No?
ones. Eh? We'll go in the other. We'll go in both of them next time. Eh? I'm a proper Luke. Oh. Close. But definitely no. Oh, I see how you're going about it. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
That's where I'm finding all
Yeah.
the pieces.
Yeah. That's a good idea. Good way of doing it, that. Good way of doing it. Good way. Hello, buddy.
Could
How
you
are you
pass
doing?
me a drink, please, babe?
Oh, you are? Bottle of Coke?
Yeah.
There you go. Coca-Cola. Did the bins get back?
Yeah. I've already done it.
Let's try it, Jake.
Be right back. Be right back. Be right back. Oh. I won't. Mwah. Merry Christmas. If I don't see you before then. I just want to get comfortable. I'm not doing anything with it. I'm moving about. Trying to get comfy. Trying to get comfortable. How's the lovely Walt doing? Ooh, 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 the unseen thing warming me.
How you doing, Walt? Hope you're doing well. Okay, kitty cat. You okay?
Come on. Hello. Hello. He's a good girl. And yeah. Yeah.
Good, good. Glad to hear that.
What? Oh, good. Good. Good, good. Oh. You all set for Christmas?
We're nearly there. I just got to get a few more bits now. I guess.
Hmm?
We're nearly there.
We are, yeah. Nearly. Nearly, nearly. A bit more shopping to do.
Yeah, just a bit, not much.
All bits, innit?
Hmm.
That ain't right.
That is.
Taking a day trip on Christmas. Are you?
Oh.
Ooh. Going anywhere nice? Or to see family?
close, but no sir.
Yeah, that's not right.
Going out of town for the day, coming back out the day after Christmas. Mm.
Oh, cool. Well, my family are going to Tenerife.
Yep.
All my family are going away on holiday.
So I was gonna get another pack of Christmas cards for them all, but good job on that then, innit?
Well, I'll probably turn up. No idea with that puzzle.
Well, I'm getting there with it.
I know.
I've done loads before. This is how far I got up to. If you want to see right there. Okay.
Did you see?
Not this side.
Oh, yeah. Put a shadow on it. Yeah, it's just a shop, isn't it? That's all. Yeah, a lot to do yet. Alright. No.
Too late.
Need a cat.
Oh, yeah.
Nope. Nope. Who knows? Take them fans apart on your computer again, because I left the bloody stickers on. I left the stupid stickers on.
Silly bum bum. Well,
Remove the pistol from underneath Russ's pillow. The date, July 28, 1996. Cincinnati heart surgeon Dr. Darrell Sartorius had a second chance at love when he married a pretty young divorcee. But happiness is sometimes elusive. Dr. Sartorius fell into a serious depression and apparently committed suicide with a .38 caliber pistol. But why did he fire a test shot into the sofa cushion before killing himself? Cincinnati, Ohio, the sixth largest city in the United States. Because of its size and sophistication, its healthcare facilities are among the finest anywhere. Dr. Darrell Sartorius was one of the city's most successful and respected heart surgeons, but he was also impatient and demanding.
Dr. Sartorius was a very busy surgeon, but he didn't have the strongest people skills. He was perceived by many of his coworkers as very gruff, angry, kind of difficult to please sort of man.
Dr. Sartorius met his wife Janet, who was a nurse at the same hospital. The couple had 4 children together, 3 daughters and a son. And it wasn't long before Janet realized the many challenges of being married to a busy doctor.
He was in a solo practice, which took up all of his time. He was on call all of the time. He chose to do that, and he was doing very well. But it wasn't easy, and he was always worried that his last referral would be his last referral.
The hard work and sacrifice paid off. By the mid-1980s, Dr. Sartorius was earning $300,000 a year. But the climb to the top of his profession came with a price. The marriage was strained due to long hours, pressure, and Darrell's explosive temper.
He was almost dangerous. He could put you down. He could make you feel really bad about yourself. And he would do it. And sometimes to the children, he liked to be in control, and he liked to be in charge, and he liked to be a provider and a caretaker. And while we enjoyed some of that, we weren't totally wanting it to be controlled or taken care of, and that bothered him. I think I was a little too independent for him.
After 30 years of marriage, the couple divorced. Dr. Sartorius was lonely, depressed, and overweight, and had a difficult time living apart from his children.
He was interested in finding a woman, I think, who didn't challenge him much, who would tell him how wonderful he was and stroke his ego, so to speak.
For companionship, Sartorius turned to a dating service. Dating services are a big business in the United States. For a fee, clients provide their picture and personal information, which the service distributes to other clients. The dating service thought Dr. Sartorius and 45-year-old Dante Britton would make a good match. Ms. Britton described herself as the owner of a daycare facility who had recently been divorced.
She was cute, perfect size, 2, very petite. She was able to give off the air of, I am a catch, which is very important to a mate, somebody looking for a mate.
After 4 months of dating, Dr. Sartorius and Dante were married, It looked as if Darrell was moving on with his life. But soon, his new wife noticed problems.
He was very nice and very kind, but he was so depressed.
And along with depression, Dante discovered that Darrell was impotent.
He was embarrassed to tell me, and he wasn't, I guess, quite sure how I'd take it. And I just told him, just keep giving me lots of hugs and lots of kisses on the cheek, and I just keep holding my hand.
Dr. Sartorius was so depressed that he spoke of committing suicide to some of his colleagues. Part of the problem were some startling secrets he found out about his new wife. After Dr. Sartorius married Dante Britton, the couple moved into a luxurious home in an upscale Cincinnati suburb. Dante relished the lifestyle that her husband's income could provide.
She finally had her wish, you know. She had fur coats made, she had Jaguars, she had Lexus, she had all the things she wanted. She went to spas, she went to the Caribbean, she went on holidays. Really, that's what she seemed to always want, was that perfect lifestyle.
But from the start, the marriage was in trouble. Dr. Sartorius was suffering from depression, impotence, and the couple fought often about money and who controlled the purse strings.
Oh, Deborah, I am so happy for you. Wherever you want the wedding reception is fine. Don't worry about the cost. I'll take care of it.
There had been a terrible argument when Dante learned Darrell was going to pay for his daughter's wedding.
You spend far too much money on your kids the way it is. And I'm sick of it.
Dante resented spending money on Darrell's children.
If he were to buy something for the children, she would retaliate by going out and buying designer clothes, furs, jewelry, running up the credit card bill, basically in retaliation for him paying attention to his own children.
Dante's behavior prompted Sartorius to look into his wife's background. He found out that much of what Dante had told him were lies. Her real name was Della Hall. She never graduated from UCLA as she had claimed. In fact, she hadn't finished high school. And she had lied about how many times she had been married.
Dr. Sartorius was Della's fifth husband. She was the type of person who had to have the last word, who would often go out of a relationship with a bang, so to speak.
And Sartorius discovered his new wife had a long history of violence.
She threatened husband number 4 with a gun. She threatened husband number 3 with a knife. She, one guy, the common law husband, she actually lit his bed on fire, drugged him and lit his bed on fire. He woke up in a burning bed. He lived through it. Thank God.
There were rumors that she had murdered previous boyfriends and possibly another husband out in California. We spent quite a bit of time working with the Los Angeles Homicide Squad, who were very cooperative and tracked down several leads for us, but we're never able to identify a previous boyfriend or husband in Southern California that was not currently alive.
Mrs. Sartorius had also been convicted of threatening an earlier husband with a gun, an incident that terrified Darrell.
I spoke to one of his colleagues, another heart surgeon in Cincinnati, about this, and he said Darrell came into work one day wearing a bulletproof vest, and this other surgeon could not believe it. He said, what are you talking about? And Darrell said, well, I'm fearful for my life, and I'm wearing a bulletproof vest, and he admitted to it.
Officer, I need your help.
After learning the truth about his new wife, Dr. Sartorius stopped a local policeman at a gas station. He handed the policeman a handgun belonging to his wife and asked him to take it because he feared for his life. The policeman noted that Dr. Sartorius seemed disoriented. Dr. Sartorius' next stop was his lawyer's office. Although the marriage was only 10 months old, Sartorius wanted his wife cut out of his will. He also began divorce proceedings. By this time, the couple no longer slept together. He spent most of his time in the basement, and days would go by without the two of them seeing one another. On Monday morning, February 19, 1996, Dr. Sartorius didn't show up for work and didn't answer his pages. His nurse called 911.
911 emergency dispatcher for me.
I work for Daryl Sartorius, and he is a doctor, and I've been paging him. I'm afraid something has happened to him, because this is like him not to answer a page.
When police arrived at the Sartorius home, Mrs. Sartorius said she didn't know where her husband was. Police asked to search the home. Dr. Sartorius' car was in the garage. In the basement, they found Dr. Sartorius dead with a gunshot wound to the head. A .38 caliber pistol was on the floor.
It had the appearances of a suicide. It was a gunshot wound to the side of the head. The gun was relatively close to the body.
The blood was completely dry, and rigor mortis had set in, an indication that he had been dead for at least a day or two. It appeared that Sartorius had been drinking and watching television when he fired the fatal shot.
Well, I knew that he was certainly suicidal, and his lawyer thought that he was suicidal, and that there had been a chance that it had been suicide.
The .38 caliber pistol used in Dr. Sartorius' death was registered to Mrs. Sartorius, who had picked it up from this store just 24 hours before he was killed. First impressions indicated that Dr. Sartorius' death was suicide. He was depressed on antidepressant medication, and he told friends he was considering suicide. Mrs. Sartorius said she didn't hear any gunshots from the basement, but the next-door neighbors heard a loud bang from the Sartorius home sometime after midnight on Saturday. When forensic experts arrived at the scene, they immediately saw other inconsistencies. 2 shots had been fired, one into the sofa cushion, the other into the head.
It is not uncommon at all for the person who is going to use this firearm to take their own life to test fire the weapon first, to make sure they know how to use the weapon.
The bullet entered just above the right ear, and there was no exit wound. Blood was expelled from Sartorius' mouth and nose, but there was blood spatter on Dr. Sartorius' left arm, as well as both sides of his right hand. It appeared that Sartorius' right arm was in his lap at the time of the fatal shot, and not behind his head holding the gun. Proof of this was blood found on Dr. Sartorius' right palm. If Dr. Sartorius shot himself, the handle of the gun would have prevented blood spatter from hitting his palm when the shot was fired.
The bloodstains that are present on the polymer surface of the right hand of Dr. Sartorius represent the exhalation of blood after injury. And these are distributed over quite a wide area, but it also indicates that the hand, that is the right hand, was very close to the face. And it indicates to me that the hand was moved after the exhalation of blood occurred.
You've got the problem. If Daryl Sartorius fired the fatal shot at himself, his hand would have been back here at the time, and not in a position to receive the blood spatter.
Another discrepancy. Blood on the front of the sofa in front of the body.
This blood couldn't have come from him and been hitting the front of the couch at, let's say, a 40-degree angle. That this had to have been like flung off of somebody's hands.
Finally, there was the second bullet fired at the scene. It was possible that Dr. Sartorius had test-fired the weapon before firing the fatal shot into his head. But the powder burns on Dr. Sartorius's right hand and on the sofa were on top of the blood, which meant the blood was there first, before the second shot was fired.
Dr. Sartorius most likely would not have been able to fire that shot himself. It was done by someone else. It is most logical that the hand was moved to an area where the second shot was fired in an attempt to produce perhaps gunshot residue on the hands of the victim, which would then, in the mind of the shooter, make this appear more like a suicide than a homicide.
Mrs. Sartorius was the only other person in the house when Darrell died. But what was her motive for murder?
She had a $1 million motive. She wanted that money. He had a pension plan that she was entitled to as his wife.
If Darrell had divorced her, Mrs. Sartorius would have only received an allowance of between $1,000 and $2,000 a month. $1 million is a powerful motive for murder. But perhaps the most damaging piece of information was what Della's mother told police.
Della's mom gets on the phone, calls the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, and assures them that Darrell Sartorius did not commit suicide. Assures them that he was murdered, and guarantees them her daughter is the one that committed the offense.
Della Faye Hall, also known as Dottie Britton, was arrested and charged with murder in the shooting death of her husband, Darrell Sartorius. Her defense suggested a killer was loose in the neighborhood, since a neighbor was brutally murdered a few blocks away 3 days after Sartorius's death. But there were no signs of forced entry in the Sartorius home, and prosecutors were convinced that the forensic evidence and motive clearly pointed to Mrs. Sartorius. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Dr. Sartorius was on the sofa in the basement watching television. His wife approached from behind with her .38 caliber pistol. She fired a fatal shot. Blood from his nose and mouth spattered over his right palm, evidence that he was not holding the gun when it was fired. Della then placed the gun in his hand and fired the second shot to make sure gunpowder residue would be found on his hands. But the blood on his palm showed otherwise, as did the powder burns on the sofa cushions, which were also on top of the blood stains. During the murder, blood got onto Della's hand, which he tried to shake off. The blood hit the sofa from the front at a 45-degree angle.
But in moving Dr. Sartorius's hand and in moving and putting the gun into it, she committed some very fatal flaws to her defense that this was a suicide. You now have blood. She got blood on her hands and kind of flung it back. So now you've got blood spatter on the couch coming from the wrong direction. And it's down below where his legs would have been. And there was no scientific way to explain that from a suicide position. So she's got that problem. She's got blood going the wrong direction on the couch. She's got an arm where it shouldn't be. She's got blood on both sides of his hands where it shouldn't be. And she's got smeared blood on a firearm where it shouldn't be.
Although Dr. Sartorius's death may have appeared to be suicide, the forensic evidence clearly pointed to murder. During the trial, the voice of Dr. Sartorius himself was heard in the courtroom, a message to his daughter left on her answering machine.
You can hear the fear in his voice that, she's threatening to kill me. I'm afraid she's going to follow through on this. I may not live through this. Please don't push this right now.
A Cincinnati jury deliberated for just over 4 hours before delivering a verdict.
We, the jury, in the district joint, find the defendant, Della Dante Sartorius, guilty of aggravated murder.
She was sentenced to life in prison and won't be eligible for parole until 2014.
Well, you know, would I have preferred to see Della get the death penalty? Yes, I would have. I think that what she did was terrible.
There was really an overwhelming amount of blood evidence here to indicate that this was a staged scene. And to this day, I don't know what Della was thinking that she was going to be able to get away with, because the evidence, there was just too much evidence there.
Her own mother calls her a black widow spider. Her own mother characterizes her as a fortune hunter who found her way to success by latching on to a successful man.
Noted crime writer Aphrodite Jones interviewed Della in prison for her best-selling book, Della's Web. Jones believes that when Della heard about her husband's divorce plans, Della concluded that murder was her only alternative.
Absolutely, Della is a born killer. She is a born sociopath. She is somebody who views the world through her eyes only, which doesn't add up with the reality, the consensus of reality in the rest of the world. In her eyes, the world is her oyster for the taking. And if she can't take it, she'll find a way to take it. There is no earning anything, there is no justification for anything. It's just all about her.
The Sartorius family cannot easily forget the years stolen from them through a senseless, irrational act of betrayal.
He has wonderful children who are very accomplished and educated, and he would be very proud of them. He now has 2 son-in-laws and 2 grandchildren whom I think he would have adored, would have loved to have spent time with, and I think he would have come into his own in this part of his life, where he had accomplished what he had tried to do, and he could sit back and enjoy his accomplishments, certainly with his children. And I'm very sad that he was not allowed to enjoy that, and I miss him. We all miss him a lot.
Just after dark on a warm summer evening, 5 children were walking home along this road. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a pickup truck headed towards them. 3 of the children were hit. 1 was killed. The driver sped up. Start of the fall semester in 1995, a 23-year-old college co-ed, Tina Bigger, was reported missing. In 1989, a 4-year-old girl was rushed to a Texas hospital. An artery in her leg was completely severed. The little girl died shortly after arrival. Medical investigators believed the leg wound was no accident. Montgomery, Texas is a small farming community about 90 miles east of Dallas. With a population of less than 1,000, life is simple here. Peaceful and quiet. In 1988, Debbie Lovelace and her two daughters from a previous marriage, Amy and April, moved in with John Miller. He too was divorced and worked in the construction industry.
My marriage with John was good. He was a very good man. Took care of me and the kids real well. And we had a happy home life.
We had a lot of fun together. The children, we did a lot of things with the children. We didn't leave them home when we went somewhere, so we took them with us. And had a family, a very close-knit family, really.
John, Debbie, and the two girls moved onto a 5-acre farm just a few miles outside of town. It was complete with a house, barn, horses, and family pets. And for the children, freedom to roam and play among the beauties of nature. 4-year-old April loved living on a farm.
She loved to play outside. She loved, being outside, and she liked to climb trees a lot. So I had a time keeping her out of trees.
And she was just bubbly. I mean, she was just full of life. She just got into everything. She's always running. I don't think she knew how to walk. She just ran everywhere. Just a bundle of fun.
Just after Christmas, on January 4th, 1989, the couple's older daughter Amy headed for school. April went outside to play. Debbie did her chores. John was working on an old building on the corner of the property. Around noon, Debbie called for April to come home for lunch, but there was no response. Then John came running towards the house carrying April, who was bleeding profusely from a severe leg wound.
She didn't have any clothes on. And I couldn't do anything but scream. I was hysterical. I was just... Because she was just black and blue all over, and I could see it at a distance, and it was just... It was horrible.
Her right leg fell open when there was a large gash in it all the way to the bone. I knew that this was a serious, very serious wound. When she had already bled out, she has a very small amount of time in which to get help and survive.
Even though John was a trained paramedic, there was little he could do. April had lost too much blood. The 4 by 6-inch gash in April's leg had torn away a large portion of her femoral artery.
It was just that, it was like that whole section of her leg was just gone. It was just like it had been ripped out.
Doctors did everything they could to save April's life, but the damage was just too great.
And it was just, she had went through too much, and she went into a second shock. And she just couldn't make it.
4-year-old April died on the operating room table. John told police that he found his stepdaughter nude under a tree and bleeding profusely from a leg wound. According to John, April said, "The dogs did it." The sheriff ordered an autopsy. The suspicion was murder. John Miller said his daughter April, before her death, told him that the dog caused her fatal leg wound. The local sheriff's department suspected foul play. Journalist David Hanners covered this story for the Dallas Morning News.
They had a dead child on their hands, so they needed to investigate it. And I think their immediate thinking was someone killed her.
During the autopsy, the pathologist noticed long vertical marks and puncture wounds all over April's body, which he believed were indicative of some form of abuse. And he saw no indication that April's leg wound was caused by a dog, since the wound did not have the jagged edges often seen in animal bites. The wound was cleanly cut, and the pathologist concluded it had been made by a knife. His finding was that April had been murdered. As John and Debbie returned from April's funeral service, they faced a full-scale investigation.
The police were everywhere. I don't know exactly how many, but there was people everywhere, walking everywhere, and going through the house and walking everywhere outside.
So, what's going on? What are you doing? And they told me then that it was a investigation, into the death of April.
They felt like that dogs couldn't have done it to her. It was very scary. I couldn't figure it. I couldn't understand how somebody could have come and done that.
Police found April's blood on a fence post and some leaves, but found no other outward signs of any dog attack. There were 3 dogs on the property. 2 belonged to the family, the 3rd belonged to a neighbor. None of the dogs had shown any hint of violence before. In the couple's home, investigators found paraphernalia allegedly linking the couple to the occult.
They thought maybe the cutting of April's leg was a bloodletting ceremony for a cult, and that's why she died, or that's why this was done. And that was one theory that they investigated heavily.
Police also collected an electric curling iron, thumbtacks, and push pins, items suspected of causing the scratch marks and puncture wounds on April's body. Next, they asked the couple repeatedly for the knife.
We were grilled for hours about the knife that was supposedly had made the cut on her leg. Did I have the knife? Where was it?
John's hunting knife was confiscated, and all of the items were sent to the crime lab for analysis. A presumptive test showed possible signs of blood on the knife, and with that finding, John Miller and Debbie Loveless were charged with murder.
The visions that it evoked are just horrendous, of them holding this little girl down, gashing her leg with this knife, cutting out a large chunk of skin and artery with this knife, and then whacking her repeatedly with this curling iron, and then sticking little push pins in her.
John and Debbie were both given lie detector tests. Debbie passed, but John did not.
The state police and local police held the polygraph against us, saying, well, you flunked it, so you must have done it.
He had failed it, and I couldn't understand. I'd never seen any kind of violence, any kind of anything out of John. And these police officers were telling me that he did this. I couldn't understand it. It made no sense to me. So then I did question, and tried to figure out why.
At the trial, John and Debbie were represented by court-appointed attorneys. One of the lawyers did not want to use the dog attack story as a defense.
The other lawyer came in and said, look, we can't pursue the dog attack. He said the DA threatened us that he could just blow us out of the water. There's nothing there to show dog attack, so basically I have nothing to fight with.
Prosecutors portrayed John as the enraged stepfather who got angry with April, lost his temper, and abused and murdered her. Debbie was portrayed as a battered wife, too afraid of her husband to do anything about it. Submitted into evidence was the autopsy report that April had been murdered, and the items from the couple's home, which were suspected of causing the wounds.
If you're sitting there listening to them lay out this theory of how they think this crime occurred, I mean, it's a horrendous case. It's horrible to think of them, holding this little girl down and doing this stuff to her.
John's court-appointed attorney, Paul Chitwood, asked the judge for more time to interview prosecution witnesses, and he also requested funds to hire his own forensic expert. Both requests were denied. A defense chemist testified that the original test on John's hunting knife, which found blood, was presumptive. Further testing on the knife showed it wasn't human blood. And no blood was found on the curling iron, the push pins, or thumbtacks. The possibility of a dog attack was never presented to the jury.
In final arguments, one of the defense lawyers admits it was murder. Admits that April was murdered by someone. Says, you know, she was murdered. I don't know who did it, but the state hasn't proved my client is the one who did it.
The jury found both John and Debbie guilty of murder and sentenced them to life in prison.
The first time that steel door clanged behind me, there is no sound that you've ever heard that sounds like that. It has a distinct sound that will just make your hair stand on end. You know that's not going to open again.
I couldn't close my eyes and see anything except for the way she was when we found her and the way she looked when she died. I didn't sleep for a long time. I thought I was going to be there for the rest of my life.
I had started fighting the day I got in. I had already written to Centurion Ministries, I'd written to the governor, I'd written to the lieutenant governor, I'd written to congressmen. You know, I spent more money on stamps and I probably could have had a pretty good meal on it.
When you're put in that position and you're convicted of something that you didn't do, I just lost all hope of anything good ever coming from it, you know, for it ever to be turned around.
I knew I was innocent. I knew Debbie was innocent. And I was not going to stop fighting until I got somebody to prove we were innocent.
As the years passed in prison, Debbie Loveless and John Miller's first concern was for their older daughter, Amy, who was living in foster care. The other concern was finding a way to prove their innocence.
You know, I never knew innocent people went to prison or were convicted for something they didn't do. And I guess I was naive and stupid thinking that it didn't happen. And then when it did, I couldn't believe it. Because I was innocent and they were saying I was guilty.
John and Debbie maintained that April was playing outside and was unclothed because it was a warm day. They believed that one of the dogs attacked April while she was playing. At lunchtime, when they were looking for April, they saw the dogs were agitated. When John followed them into the woods, he found April bleeding profusely from a leg wound. John said April told him that the dogs did it before she lapsed into unconsciousness. But the pathologist who performed the autopsy ruled the death a homicide. Attorney Robert Ardis was assigned to handle the couple's appeal.
Robert Ardis is one of those attorneys that renews your faith in the legal profession. He has a good heart. He won't stop digging until he gets where he thinks he ought to be.
While in the courthouse, sifting through the evidence, Ardis found a box containing hundreds of photographs of April's wounds. Most were autopsy photos, which had been shown to the jury at the time.
Cold again.
But he also found another set of photos taken just after April entered the emergency room. These were photos that had not been shown to the jury, and it wasn't clear whether John and Debbie's original defense lawyers had even seen them.
Rapidly.
When Ardis compared the two sets of pictures, he made a startling discovery. The pictures of April's leg wound were different.
Pictures look like the dog has been involved in this death.
Ardis sent the photos to a forensic pathologist at the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Science in Dallas. After studying the photos, he said that this child had been attacked by a dog.
He said, I can tell you,
Yeah, it's something with canine teeth. What we were able to show how a dog's teeth would just overlay exactly on the puncture wounds around where the place had been taken out of the leg.
Dr. Dennis Asen is a forensic odontologist and agrees that animal bites are often difficult to identify. He says that many animal bites don't look like bite wounds at all because animals often tear the flesh rather than biting it.
When you have an injury pattern to determine whether it's a bite mark or not, you need to look at the entire situation to see what other clues and evidence there might be. Is this truly a bite mark or not?
But if dogs had caused April's leg wound, why didn't the original pathologist see this? The answer was obvious. The wound looked different at the autopsy because it had been cleaned and trimmed with a scalpel while the surgeon attempted to repair the wound and save April's life.
When you go into surgery, the wound in this particular instance was very jagged, very uneven, and the surgeon, using the scalpel, will go in and clean the wound up, and they will peel back and get back into fresh tissue there.
And the new team of pathologists noted that many of the scratch marks on April's back consisted of 4 parallel lines. Lines corresponding with the 4 nails of a dog's forefeet.
There you go.
Here was a paw print. Here was another
Got
paw
bad.
print. I'm told that as long as the person is alive, those particular bruises that had the print of a paw there would not show up. But when she was on her back in the operating room and died on the operating table, then the blood puddled in those places, and it made it very apparent when you looked at them that there was a paw print.
There was now hope for a new trial. After spending 5 years in prison for the murder of their daughter April, John Miller and Debbie Loveless finally had forensic evidence to corroborate their story. That one of the dogs on their property had attacked and killed April. Their new attorney, Robert Ardis, also uncovered a written deposition from a woman who had witnessed the dogs on John and Debbie's farm attack 3 different people on 3 separate occasions.
She pointed this out to the sheriff. So the sheriff said, oh, they were just playing.
But the woman wasn't called to testify at the original trial. Armed with this new evidence, Ardis requested a new trial. His argument that John Miller and Debbie Loveless did not have adequate counsel at their original trial. Ironically, John Miller's original defense attorney, Paul Chitwood, agreed.
Well, he was pissed off. Nobody likes to be told that they did a bad job officially, and ineffectiveness of counsel basically says that.
Although Paul Chitwood is now deceased, he testified on behalf of John and Debbie at a pretrial hearing, reminding the court he requested and was denied access to the prosecution witnesses before the trial and was denied funds to hire an independent forensic expert to analyze the evidence.
He had always felt that they were not guilty of the crime they were charged with.
The prosecutor's office would not comment on the allegation that some of the photographs in this case might have been withheld from the original defense team. In 1993, a judge dismissed the case against John Miller and Debbie Loveless, citing overwhelming evidence in the couple's favor. After 5 long years, they were finally released from prison.
It was a very poor investigation by law enforcement. They didn't buy the dog attack theory. They didn't look into it.
I couldn't believe it. It was scary because I had been this place for almost 5 years. And I I can't even explain it. It's not, I don't think there's words. Happiness that I was going home, that I was going to see Amy.
The stress and strains of incarceration took its toll. After they were released from prison, Debbie and John separated.
I lost 5 years with my son, with Amy, and with Debbie. You know, they were gone. Debbie was gone. She'd found somebody else, you know, because of trying to get help, and she was gone. So as far as, I guess I was walking out of prison, but my life had basically been destroyed already.
A bad investigation, aided by bad science, really was kind of frightening to me. This could have happened to you know, any of us.
Just the injustice of everything that was done. You know, how they crucified us for something that we didn't do. And I don't understand why they did it.
In 1995, police in California received an anonymous letter which identified a pair of severed hands as those of a Navy pilot who had been murdered. The letter described the murder in gruesome detail. Investigators searched for some clue to the identity of the author and the killer. San Diego, the second largest city in California, its bay is one of the finest natural harbors in the world and is home to one of the largest naval bases in the country. In 1994, workers at the San Diego Fibers Corporation were sifting through some cardboard in a recycling bin. They made a gruesome discovery. 2 human hands.
First, I wasn't sure that this was legitimate. I thought a pair of human hands found in dumpsters seemed a little bit strange.
We collected evidence as if it was a normal homicide with a complete body. This was a little bit different because all we had were hands.
X-rays showed degenerative damage of the joints consistent with an individual over age 60, and the size of the fingers and knuckles indicated they were men's hands. The right hand had one distinctive feature. The thumbnail was missing. Detectives checked local hospitals and morgues to see if they had a body of an elderly man without hands. On the other side of town, Mary Mead and Terry Holland were beginning to worry. They hadn't seen their father, Don Harden, in more than a week.
And I called everybody that I could possibly get a hold of. Have you seen him? Have you heard from him? Nobody had heard anything. So that's at the point where I really got scared, because I thought, where would he have gone?
It's very hard to explain. You go through scared, and then almost in anger, and then worry.
When police learned that Don Harden was missing the thumbnail of his right hand, they knew immediately and the fingerprint analysis confirmed that the hands were those of 74-year-old retired Navy pilot Don Harden.
It's a shock. I felt that we were in some badly produced police story from TV. I mean, this doesn't happen in real life, and it just really threw us for a loop.
When homicide detectives searched Don Harden's home, they found evidence of robbery. The television, VCR, and microwave oven were all missing. So was Harden's pickup truck. The TV guide was open to March 28th, which was probably the last day Don Harden was home. Small drops of blood were found in the kitchen, and it appeared that detergents and bleach had been used to wash the kitchen and bathroom floors.
We were under the impression that it was either a missing persons report or a theft involved with a missing person. You never lose hope. You never lose hope.
Don Harden was a widower who had moved to San Diego a few years earlier to be near his daughters. Neighbors described Harden as ornery and difficult, but his daughters remembered him as a loving father.
One of my cherished thoughts that I have of him is that every time I spoke to him on the telephone, at the end of our conversation, I always said, "I love you, Dad," and he'd say, "I love you too, kiddo."
Harden had a history of helping those in need. He often hired homeless men to do odd jobs around his property, and he often let them live in a camper in his backyard.
We were very comforted knowing that there was somebody there in case of an emergency, that my father could be taken care of immediately.
Wow, I think that's really great. There's a guy there that can kind of keep an eye on Dad. He's kind of a companion to Dad. Gives him some, someone to talk to. He helps him out. I felt good about it.
Police were on the lookout for the items stolen from Harden's home.
We, in fact, did recover some of Mr. Harden's property. I believe it was a wallet and a driver's license and maybe some Army medals. And we followed that up on that to find out if that would lead back to a suspect. That was kind of a dead end. It was found in a dumpster, and we really couldn't put that back to a liable suspect.
Investigators had no idea what happened to the rest of Don Harden's body, but they suspected something terrible happened inside his home. A pair of severed hands found at a San Diego recycling plant were identified as those of 74-year-old Don Harden, a retired Navy
I will be live
pilot.
later on.
A search of Harden's
Thank you so
home
much for
revealed
joining,
evidence
and
of
I'll see you guys
burglary
later.
and
Lots of love.
violence.
We were
Bye,
in the kitchen,
everybody.
and the kitchen floor had a fine white